All right, so we're here again on the third week in a row to talk about team revenue. And we define team revenue as a unified multidisciplinary team comprised of sales, marketing, and other key stakeholders throughout the organization who work in alignment to drive long-term, recurring, stable revenue. And our 5-point manifesto that kind of breaks that out. Point one, aligning incentives across sales and marketing and rewarding everyone for being aligned and winning together. Point two, measuring and optimizing only for the metrics that actually lead to the business outcomes that are strategic wins for the business. Point three, building a demand engine, a community of future buyers and customers, and providing value to prospects without strings before they're ready to buy. And this is what we'll be focusing on today. And then listening to customers, actually building a customer revenue strategy that is centered around the way the customer thinks, the way the customer buys, what the customer's pain points are, and so forth. And then cultivating a shared team vision, mission, values, and culture, and really trying to align everybody around those core things. So that's team revenue as we're defining it, and excited to have all of you along with us as we talk specifically about the demand engine, and glad to have Adam with us to kind of be our featured guest as we do that. So when I think about a demand engine, I think about a community and content-based set of practices and structures that over time are basically engaging with prospective buyers before they even have enough intent to be considered buyers. So we're essentially creating awareness and intent within future buyers rather than trying to convince somebody who's not ready to buy the product that they should buy it. So it's the polar opposite to the idea that we're going to continue to scale up, whether it be full cycle AEs or SDR resources in the sales team, when we might not really have enough of a group of prospective buyers that are ready to buy. And so what you see a lot of times is you see these companies and they're, not hitting their revenue goals. They've got short-term or long-term revenue shortfalls compared to their overheads or their targets or whatever the case may be. And their answer is, we're going to just hire more salespeople and, crank up that coffee is for closers mentality, right? Where we're just going to go out there and close some business. Now, there are cases where, the product market fit is so solid and there's some low hanging fruit out there in the market where you might be able to achieve a short-term revenue goal by, adding either the first full cycle AE or, one or two specific networked in the industry type sales folks where the relationships are already there. But for most companies, scaling up their sales operations is not going to be a very healthy long-term revenue fix. So what I think we're talking about here with the demand engine is creating essentially a community and a content stream that is going to provide very high intent, very well educated buyers coming into the funnel, very low in the funnel, right? And so you hear Chris Walker and others talk about dark funnel and dark social, meaning that we have essentially a funnel that you can't even see, you can't measure, because they're not registering in your typical sales funnel or marketing funnel. You're not getting their contact information. You're not putting them into a sales cadence. You're not even talking to them, but their intent is growing. Their intent to buy is growing. Their understanding of the brand, their sense of credibility of the brand is growing. And this is all happening without any strings attached, right? So one of the reasons that the idea of a demand engine is honestly a bit controversial for many is that attribution within this model is nowhere near as direct as, marketing qualified lead style attribution, where the whole goal of marketing is to get a set of contact information and pass that on to the sales team to enter into the sales process, right? So that's not what happens in a demand engine. Now, there is always going to be high intent call to action forms. There's always going to be an opportunity for people to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested at all points. But the goal is not just to generate as many sets of contact information as possible. I would argue that in many cases, this does damage to a brand. Depends on the industry. In some industries, the more intense sales cycle is expected. and people don't really get offended or irritated nearly as much. But as privacy concerns grow and the way the internet is structured, it's going to be increasingly difficult just to squeeze contact information out of people. And people are going to continue to want to do as much of their buyer's process as they can anonymously and on their own time. So the more we give them to facilitate that process of educating themselves and allowing their intent to buy to grow without having to deal with salespeople, the better off we're going to be as fans. And I'm thinking about it from a brand standpoint, because it's ultimately the brand that's going to suffer when you irritate a bunch of people that aren't ready to buy, versus cultivating a relationship with them and a community around the brand that provides value to them, along with content that provides value to them. So when you talk about what's that content type going to be, it's going to be anything that provides value to that, ICP, that ideal customer profile. It's not going to be a whole lot of product style marketing content where you're just like, let me tell you again about our product and its features. It's not like that. It's more like, hey, this is a set of topics that our ICP are very interested in and would bring value to them in their business. And then you bring in experts, people that are not part of your brand. And your brand is essentially the host, right? Your brand is the host of this value add content stream. And then your brand is sort of the center point in a community of ICP type folks. So that when somebody says to their friend in, a fellow company, hey, I'm looking for a solution for this, they get a referral to your company from their friend, but their friend might not even be an actual customer. But they've been hanging out around the community and the content that your brand has been putting out. And so they're, again, already very familiar with who you are and what you do. You are credible to them because you've been providing value to them without any strings attached, without them even becoming a customer. And it's very counterintuitive to this idea that we have to attribute, sales numbers or metrics for every single dollar we spend in social or in other forms of marketing. We're just not going to be able to maintain that level of attribution moving forward. Some people say attribution is dead. I would say attribution is just not what it used to be. And the sooner we make our peace with this and begin to use instinct and use our sense of overall engagement with the brand as the new attribution, the sooner we'll be able to get out from under this idea that we just need to collect as many, phone numbers and email addresses as possible and pound these people into the ground until they buy from us. And we've talked about the last 2 weeks, the ethical aspect of this as well, where I just do not understand for the life of me why it's considered a win to convince somebody who should not be buying your product to buy your product. That is not going to be a very long-term win for your brand. Ultimately, if you're in SaaS, that's churn waiting to happen, right? If you're in other industries, at best, it's going to be a short-term revenue bump. But long-term, you've just acquired the wrong kind of customer. And they may have bought, but they might be actually kind of bitter about having been talked into buying. And that's not going to be healthy for your brand or for your long-term sustainable revenue, which is what we're after here with Team Revenue. We're not just after short-term revenue bumps. We're looking for long-term recurring stable revenue. And I would argue that inside of all of those concepts is right in the center of it is the idea of profitability. And if you're spending a ton of time just trying to keep these people from leaving or blasting you negatively across their networks because they really shouldn't have been a buyer to begin with, then you've got a problem. And a demand engine is going to end up with the happiest sales team possible. The sales team is going to be just bathing in high intent, high educated buyers that they're talking to. And they're going to understand their buyer because hopefully that sales team is involved in that content and community strategy. And maybe they've even rubbed elbows with this buyer before they're even talking in a sales context. Imagine if you had, as a salesperson, and I've been a quota carrying salesperson. So I'm thinking to myself, imagine what it would be like if I get on a sales call with someone I've interacted with several times in a row in a non-sales context with whom I have some pre-existing relationship and already sees me as credible because I didn't hit them with a pitch the first time we talked, right? Last week with Candace, we talked about her concept of pitch slapping, LinkedIn specifically, where you friend or connect or whatever with someone on social media. And then 12 seconds later, it's, you should buy my product. Right. And whether we do it quite that explicitly or not, there's a whole lot of that mentality involved in a lot of the interactions that go on. So I had this interesting post that I read yesterday, and I'll go try to find it. But it was somebody talking about how when they interacted with a sales prospect, the sales prospect said, "I'm not interested in what you're selling." And, the salesperson said, "So what are you interested in?" And they said, "Well, actually, I'm trying to make your competitor's product work, like implementation and setup." So this salesperson goes to their competitor's website, downloads a bunch of best practices PDFs and resources, and sends them to their prospect and says, "I did some digging. Maybe these resources will be helpful for you." Now, if you think about how counterintuitive that is to the typical sales mentality, but what's at the heart of that is they provided value. They said, "Look, I'm not here to force you to buy. I'm here to be a help to you. Ultimately, I want you to be successful." And then a few weeks later, they were a buyer for that salesperson. So I think that's kind of the point, right? That's kind of how it works. You're providing value. You're a resource that's credible for the prospect. And oftentimes in a demand engine, you're not even getting any contact information. You're not even interacting directly with them. In a demand engine, you're just providing value. You're just providing content and community around your brand that provides value for that potential buyer before they're even buyers. And the end result, high intent, highly educated buyers for your sales team that are going to drive that long-term sustainable revenue that we're all looking for in business, right? So I want to take a minute and just introduce Adam Shaw. We're so glad to have you with us, and congrats on your first day at IntentWise, man.
Thank you so much. Actually, I see one of my IntentWise coworkers in the group here, Trisha. So she'll be able to kind of be one of the first ones to hear my philosophy.
Welcome, Trisha.
Thank you.
That's really awesome that you joined us. And Adam, I just want to kind of let you riff on your thoughts on building a demand engine.
Yeah, I think, you hit on a lot of things there that I like to hit on. So, a lot of information about, like customer success and demand capture ultimately, kind of in the end there. So, I'd like to preface, this kind of talk with my entire philosophy and most demand generation, people's philosophies into one sentence, which is, if your community can understand X, they will be more likely to purchase your product. And that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get my community of buyers, the community outside of our buyers and our customers to really understand something. At IntentWise, it's understanding, the increasing complexity of retail media and where technology can help you with that. Different companies are going to have a different X, and then the way that that's communicated changes significantly, right? When we think of, let's think of the NFT space, for instance. Understand that's like in the most basic space, right? If my community understands what an NFT is, they're more likely to buy. Search marketing has been something that's been around forever, and it's been absolutely, beat over the head. So that X has to be significantly more specific to buy your product that makes search marketing so much more successful, because there are thousands and thousands, if not millions, of experts on search engine marketing, and they're all trying to tell you something different. Not just you can walk up to somebody and say, they're more likely to buy my product if they think search engine marketing is a good way to go. That's probably not a good X right now in this day and age. So it's really taking your time to understand that. You kind of use, organic as a way to understand it, right? Is, start putting up some flags. What do you think your X should be? And start to understand, what is being responded to in an organic sense. So, taking some broad stroke information, right? So if we have a couple of pillars of an organic campaign, might be one, your broader community at large, like you're talking about, being a part of your community, not just buyers, right? Like that guy who was researching for the competitor, he wasn't a buyer until he was, right? Suddenly, that's that person, the community that you're trying to educate and to build around. And so you might have some broad stroke organic content there that, that information isn't going to push anybody to buy your product that day or maybe ever, but you're supplying value to that community. And then places like this here, a live podcast, I can go out and I can put up some flags here. Some of you guys are going to shake your head no, or nod your head yes, and I'll say, okay, maybe I hit a a good thing to keep talking about here. If I say a bunch of stuff and everybody's super bored and I start seeing people nod off, then maybe I need to change my message and the things I like to talk about to gain a little bit more traction on LinkedIn and in other areas like this.
So tell me a little bit about how you take that 30,000 foot strategy that, you just talked about and translate that into a set of tactics for a specific company. I mean, you kind of talked about intent wise a little bit, but talking about theory is so important. You've got to have a strategy that governs where you're going. But how do you translate that into a set of daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly actions for resources to be spent on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing I always do is think, all right, well, especially right now when I'm building a new demand generation team, almost from scratch, I'm really thinking, okay, what are my weaknesses? What can I do? And my first answer is always, I can't write content. It's just not what I do. So I hired a fantastic content director, started today with me at the same time. So to me, then I lean on those people, right? And I say, hey, here's what I want to accomplish, in all of your years of expertise. What do you think we're going to do? Would you like to do? So for me with a content team, it's about creating these pillars. In most companies, depending upon what kind of products you have, you're going to have anywhere between 2 to 4 pillars. Large enterprise might have dozens, right? I've been part of campaigns that have dozens and dozens of these pillars. Pillar number 1 is that community piece, hitting everybody involved in your community, not just the buyers or your customers, but everybody who's adjacent to them. And then the subsequent pillars are those individuals that are actually able to make decisions to purchase your product, and how can you help each of them. So that brings a 30,000 view to a 10,000 view. Then we focus on each pillar and we say, all right, the community as a whole, for instance, maybe it's a big LinkedIn community. We say, okay, then we want to focus a lot of our organic messaging on LinkedIn to start with. So let's make sure that we're posting some X amount of weeks every single day. Let's make sure that we have long form content, this much long form content, this much video content. And early on in a process, it might be about just, really just get as much out there, right, to kind of get some of those green, yellow, and red flags to pop back at you. You can start to understand and build out that content calendar a little bit better once you start getting some of those responses. You don't want to get caught too much up in the process too early on. It is really important to set a really good process, but you don't want to stop you from taking action. And then you can kind of, work on it through there.
Makes sense. So let's drill down even further on community real quick. I mean, I'm thinking about the way that community happens in a virtual world. And it's changed quite a bit from, when I was a kid, where community was the kids that lived on my street and the kids that went to my school and the people that I had physical contact with. So it's amazing to me how many people in the last few months that I've never met in person, but that I know on LinkedIn have been such an encouragement to me, have provided so much value in my life and helped to sharpen my, philosophical and ideological ideas about sales and marketing and team revenue and all of this. So when you think about how to build a community around a brand, what are the actual components of that? I mean, is it a Slack channel? Is it, a forum? What is it? And I'm sure the answer is some version of it depends, but
yeah, well, I mean, it really is depends based on what your product is, and just you'll find out where people are really quick, right? Because and I'm going to I'll get a little bit more deep into it in a minute, but when pay attention to your comments. Where are people sending you? Like, oh, I read this really cool article, right? Here's a link to it. Where's that link going to? And then what does that platform spend a lot of their time on? Like if you're a lot of time on LinkedIn, somebody in your target audience is starting to post these links from other places, and that place's primary platform is TikTok, maybe you need to be on TikTok, right? Or maybe, their primary area is Medium. They have a ton of Medium artists and all their people are spending time on Medium, then maybe that's where you need to go. Look at where people who you are trying to sell to are getting their information, and then where that place's primary platform is. So to kind of take your analogy, I'm a big fan of analogies, by the way. So y'all might hear a few dozen here, but to take your analogy of the neighborhood, I'm a huge Kentucky fan. Went to University of Kentucky. Okay, I live in St. Louis. Organically, I'll run into 2 or 3 Kentucky fans a week, right? People who either went there or just fans, whatever it is. I'd love to run into a lot more, but I do run into a lot of basketball fans. I mean, hundreds of. I can sit down and talk with anybody about basketball here. And that's my wider organic audience here, is a very just sports in general focused group. If I wanted to talk to Kentucky fans, I'd have to buy a flight and buy tickets to a Kentucky game. There's my paid, right? That's my paid audience. So, when you're looking at what does it mean to add in that paid piece, which is now drilling it down, where do you find them and how do you get them, right? You can only touch so many people organically before you actually have to really get into people. And that's what that is. So if you're on LinkedIn and you're talking to a ton of, of your greater audience plus your community, but for a fact that you're just not getting enough of your specific people to read your content, that's when you use your paid. And it's not new content either. I think a lot of people get a mistake that, oh, it's paid media, so therefore I have to get clicks to get ROI to make my boss happy, right? Well, maybe you do. And that's a whole different conversation that we could probably have for days and days, is how do you convince your boss to do actually good marketing? But that's a whole different thing, right? Take that organic content that's working really good for you. If it's video content, if it's written content, if it's audio content, hit the promote button in LinkedIn, pick your audience that you want to get in front of, that you're having a hard time getting in front of, and see what happens. If it does bad, like if you're getting a lot of impressions, but you're not seeing any movement, then it might just mean that what you're saying isn't right. And, maybe you have to go back to the drawing board a little bit and then throw up some more tests and to see what the flags come back as. It's not hard. It's not expensive, right? You can drop a couple $100 on a post and see how it does and get a good idea of, how that might do for you long-term. To really drill down, to keep getting further and further down that funnel to find the people that you really know can purchase it today, tomorrow, or the next day, and have an effect on their day-to-day. And the content I see that works the best in paid is almost the same as organic. In fact, you can be more salesy in organic than you can be in paid and be more with success, in my experience, because you want people to actually get value immediately off of you from paid. 5 things that you can do to improve your X, Y, or Z, right? That's good in organic. It's really good in paid because people have never seen your brand before, and their first interaction is you helping them, and not asking you to do anything. So, that's kind of a way to go about it, and really start drilling down into that.
That's really good stuff. Why don't you go a little bit more into what that balance is between the paid and organic, and how you end up capturing that demand that you've created?
Yeah, demand capture, definitely. We can jump into that, but to talk about the balance a little bit more, it depends. Okay, how old is your brand? How many followers do you have? You just gotten over your lifetime, right? There's, I've worked for enterprise brands before who had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers on LinkedIn, and other brands who had millions of followers on Facebook and other places in Twitter, and they just didn't know what to do, so they just didn't use it. So we spent $0 on paid, right? And we, because we were going to organically reach 1 million, 2 million people. So we really milked that, for lack of a better phrase, and really focus on working with the people who already have. Now, if you're talking about a new company and you're a startup, you have 50 followers on your personal LinkedIn and obviously none on your brand new company LinkedIn, then you got to spend a little bit of money. Drop a couple $100 a week just promoting posts. Figure out what people like, follow people, do a lot of just good old fashioned guerrilla marketing on LinkedIn with some dollars behind it. So I think that balance can change over time, especially just based on where is your starting. Starting from zero, are you starting from Mount Everest already, or trying to reach the moon? I think it's a little bit different. And then demand capture, I think that's something that it's difficult to talk about, because especially when it comes to upper management and non-marketers in the company, like maybe your CRO is a sales background, or your CEO doesn't really know marketing, right? Is explaining to them demand capture and making sure that they understand that we're not talking about lead generation. We're still talking about demand here. And how are you capturing? Because the first time you ever say lead generation, you're going to have a tough time, getting that term out of people's ears. And it's going to cause a lot of issues with you trying to focus on capturing the demand, right? And the way to look at it is, I'm not asking, my community to give me information. I'm accepting their information. They feel like they want to give it to me because they're like, all right, I got to learn more. Here's my email. Great, thank you so much for your email. We're going to now give you stuff, but it feels a lot more like if you're doing it right, it feels like you're accepting contact information more than you are asking for it. And if that is the way that it's feeling, and it's the way that your salespeople are coming back to you, is like they're begging to get on a call with me, they'll give me any information they want. Like, that is kind of, where we're going to, you'll start to feel like there's a lot more success. And, two pieces of demand capture to approach is, where is the demand being generated, and then where is it being captured itself? And you want to understand both, right? So, I'm a big fan of the self-reported attribution field. And a lot of people here, I think, probably use that in their, hopefully they have the opportunity to use that in their marketing. And then comparing that up against whatever your attribution tech is telling you. One thing to make sure is that you're not completely ignoring your attribution tech because you started doing this, because that's extremely important. Where people are converting is important. I think that, the extreme of people right now who are going like, oh, you don't need attribution tech. Well, no, you do, because you do really need to know where your user is most likely to actually make the decision to go to the site. So if it's organic search, do a lot of SEO, right? If it's Facebook, make sure that your paid Facebook campaign is very specific. If it's LinkedIn, if they go from the LinkedIn page to your website, make sure your LinkedIn page has all of your products. They have that new product feature, piece on there. Make sure it's just, you have the best LinkedIn page in the world. So focus on that and understand where your buyers are giving you, those demand signals, those kind of intent signals in a better way.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're doing multi-platform paid and organic all at once, you have the potential to muddy the waters quite a bit just with the amount of different things you're trying to keep track of, unless you have a really good plan for how you're, using the attribution data that you're getting and comparing that to the self-reported attribution.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time where I was increasing paid on Facebook, Instagram, and my Facebook, Instagram attribution didn't go up, but my direct and organic search attribution went way up in the exact same time frame. And that told me that I'm reaching people on social who aren't going to click through the ad. They're going to open a new tab and type the name of the company in, and it's going to show up as either direct or organic search. And it took me a minute to figure out what was going on, because my first thought was, oh, we need to obviously double down on SEO. But the self-reported attribution was telling us that they had found us on Facebook or Instagram.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's it. And one thing I think what can be difficult is if you're kind of doing it on your own as a salesperson, especially, is that you're not going to be able to get that big like swath of data that you can actually make actionable insights out of. Like, so if you have your HubSpot set up really well, right? If you, or your, whatever you're using for your CRM set up really well to capture that kind of information, you can make some big decisions based on that. Like, you might know that, okay, maybe you have 5 segments. You have CEOs, you have CROs, and then you have sales managers, and then you have, maybe another couple other segments, all that have buying, the ability to purchase your product. And they might be all telling you that all the demand is being generated in the same place. Oh, your podcast, your LinkedIn page, your articles. But if all of their demand capture is happening in different places, that's going to tell you a lot. It's going to be really hard to find out if you're just like the lone sales guy who's doing it. It's only like basically almost impossible outside of, unless you're selling $5 widgets and you're making 100 sales a day. It's going to be really difficult for you to understand what the ramifications of that are on a bigger playing field. So, if you're seeing CEOs or the big wigs who are coming in as organic, not organic search, but like direct traffic, that tells me that people are sharing the link to them on Slack or email, and then they're going, right. If it's the sales manager, it means that somebody might've said, hey, go check out XYZ product. And so they went on Google, and that's where their organic traffic. If it's paid, then, obviously that's a little bit of a different thing too, because you got to look at what the keyword itself is. If it's a very high intent keyword, maybe just have a really, really good message on your search and they're converting right there, but that's rare. So, look and see a lot of direct traffic goes unlike, I guess, not really actioned on, because people don't really think like, well, how are they getting that? Nowadays they're sharing it in Slack, right? Probably more so than email. So can you look at what your content looks like in Slack and optimize towards that.
That makes sense. So we're winding our way towards Q&A, but what are some final thoughts that you have, Adam, on this demand engine that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think get the X that I talked about at the beginning of the show. If you think about it right now and you don't know the answer, find the answer. And that might be that, depending on the type of place where you're working, that might be you who has that answer and can discover it, or you just might not have the ability to do that yourself. That might be talking to salespeople, talking to product experts internally, customer success folks. Find that X and act on it.
Good stuff. Anything else you'd like to add before we turn it over to the group?
Now let's do it. I want to hear some stuff.
Guys, what questions or thoughts do you guys have about building a demand engine? Remember to operate your own mutes.
Well, I can start if it's okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one component, is the target audience. It's just something that's a big part of the demand engine that I'm building right now, and how actually it's like a cornerstone of the whole thing, and how I actually came to this idea over a year ago. So in my case, the entire demand engine is kind of twofold strategy, where at one end we have target audience problems and something that they really need. So we are building kind of community and content around these issues. So we're not talking about products, but as you mentioned at the beginning of today's conversation, we are just bringing people to talk about some things that they really need to learn, to hear. And our brand is just at the center. And the other part of the strategy is that most of the, let's say, product marketing, right, about our products is the part that mostly be on brand advocates. So the same people from our target audience who are already our fans, and they're already doing it. So that's a part of our strategy. So they are going to talk about our product to the same audience. So we as a brand talk about not about our product. We talk about things that we know they care about, they want to listen, but their peers talk about our product. So that's
Yeah, it's like creating product evangelists out of people who will never use their product. And I'm a product evangelist for quite a few products that I'll never use. And I thought I was thinking to myself, like, how did they do that for me? And yeah, it's part of it was a community, but it was also the fact that their sales team were part of the community. They made themselves part of the community, right? So if you're getting your sales team or your sales operations group involved in the community at another level, that's huge. That's hard to buy into, right? Like, because a lot of your sales leaders are going to say, like, they don't have time because they're cold emailing 1,000 people a day, right? But if there's a way that you can get your salespeople into there, I think that'll help them create product evangelists, because people are going to like people probably before they like a product, right? Like if Joe Schmo in the sales department is like a really, really good guy and just like a super, the type of person that people just gravitate towards, get him in the community and just hanging out, because they're going to be like, Joe's really cool dude. What does he do? He works for product X. let's check out product X. I'll never use that, but I'm going to tell everybody to use that product because Joe's super cool and I want him to do a good job.
Well, that's good. And I think that it is honestly counterintuitive to the way a lot of salespeople think, sales leaders think, because again, it's okay, what are the number of activities per day of specific types that in the predictive revenue concept lead to certain amount of revenue growth? And, you work back from quota down to activities. And, that's very counter to the idea of the demand engine. And a couple things I want to add to that we get at the end here, but Alan, I want to invite you to come on and ask or say what you got.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Rob, as usual, really good conversation. Adam, I've taken a lot of value from what you just said for 10 minutes there around content. I've got a question around pros and cons. So right at the top, Rob, you were talking about, the ability for people to educate themselves. So I'm a founder of a business 6 years in, but I've come from a more of a professional buying background. And I think good buyers tend to understand the problems within their organization and sort of get all their ducks in a row before they start buying. So they want to educate themselves. And you were talking about that. That's now a pattern. More and more people are trying to educate themselves about products before they come in. So they're a lot further down the buying cycle. So if we think about that, what are the pros and cons in your view of companies that are not completely opening up demos for people to see online? And an example of that is I've just been looking at sales enablement platforms like SalesLoft and Ample Market, and I've had to have a demo with every one of them, which I don't mind doing, but sometimes you just want to be able to do it for yourself, understand, play around, and then have a conversation. So with that context, I'll just repeat the question. What are the pros and cons of sort of having those barriers in place, should we say?
Well,
Yeah,
Adam, I'd like you to take a crack at it in a second, but there's one thing I really want to say to this right off the bat. And it's there's two variables that have to be evaluated in my mind. The first is what damage is going to be done to the buying relationship by allowing sort of a self-serve demo. And in some industries with certain types of products, there might be some, because the buyer may not understand the terminology or understand their own needs very well. So that is something that should be determined by listening to customers and not by a leader who just assumes their buyers are ignorant. Mm-hmm. And I hear a lot of sales and marketing and C-suite leaders who honestly, they just kind of don't think very much of their customers or their buyers. They think they're all idiots who need their nose wiped, and it shouldn't be that way. And maybe they're in the wrong business if that's their customer and they feel that way about those people. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's the first variable. We do need to evaluate through listening to potential customers, listening to the ICP, is there damage or miscommunication or misunderstanding that can occur in a self-serve demo situation? The second variable is there a way to provide a low level or low depth self-serve demo that allows people to, just kind of stick their toes into the pool, if you will, and get a basic overview of, what does the interface look like? What is the basic feature set? What are the integrations? And what are the deliverables? And those are kind of the four things that I think about if I'm a buyer, especially of a software platform or something of that nature. I want to know those four things. I want to know, without having to schedule something with someone, if it's possible and it won't mess me up in understanding it, I would like to be able to do that on a YouTube video or just through a quick click through of a few pages on the website and just get a basic idea. Because what you see a lot of times is it's all or nothing. And I don't know if I want to dedicate 30 minutes and get into a sales cycle with a salesperson, because I don't even know if we're even on the same ballpark about whether this thing does any of the stuff I need it to do. So I think, if at all possible, we should be trying to figure out if there's an in-between point where a, relatively shallow but broad self-service demo, at least to get an overview of whether the product is even a good general fit, should be put in place before you have to schedule something with a salesperson and get into the sales cycle. So those are my two thoughts. Adam, I'd
Mhm.
love for you to take a crack at it too, man.
Yeah. So Alan, what's I guess give me a little more context for this. Are you considering the difference of gating it versus ungating a self-serve demo, or are you trying to make a decision whether or not you want to implement one?
No, I mean, from our perspective, well, we have two live products and one that's at POC stage. For the two live products, you can just go and use them. So in terms of a demo, I mean, there is, in terms of something we provide clients, we provide data and a dashboard behind the scenes, and we wouldn't demo that for a whole host of reasons around competitors. So that's one thing, but the actual main tool and usability, anybody could use it and see that. With a product that's coming down the line, we probably want to be more cautious because of competition in terms of just what we show. But anybody at any point could actually jump on and utilize the product being SaaS. So I'm actually the question was less from my perspective. It was just more broad and general. And it was, what are the pros and cons? Because I see a lot of companies sort of doing this and having that gated access, which personally I find fucking frustrating. So
yeah, no. So I think it really depends, right? Like who's your target audience. So for instance, I used to work for a SaaS company that did event software. It's called Shindig, and their big thing was that it's an extremely complicated thing to have a big event with like thousands of people virtually. But they wanted to make it accessible and easier for people who are not event marketers to do. And that meant that it was taking people with basically no knowledge of how to operate the space and giving them the tools to do it at a really high level, basically. So those people actually did really need to be walked through it. A self-serve trial for it, which is like, it would have been too confusing. There's a few event marketing softwares out there that do have self-serve platforms, and I know how to use these types of platforms, and they're confusing. I want to be walked through it because there's a lot of unique pieces to it. However, if our audience was specifically event marketers only, like event tech people who, and like, it's just a better way to make then I would say let's open it up. So like intent wise, our buyer is already a highly knowledgeable media buyer or a couple other of like media operations folks. So it's fairly open, depending upon what part of it that you're looking at, it's fairly open to get a free trial out of it and do a self-serve, because they know what they're doing. They're interested in how they could use our tool to do it better.
Yeah, and I know that space very well because that's the space we're in. So Shindig would be a competitor.
There you go. What's your company?
We're called Virtual. We have a hybrid virtual platform called Go Virtual, which hasn't been released yet. Our main product is called Explore. So it allows event planners, could be wedding planners, it could even be a business traveler, to go and explore a hotel in a modular interactive way through video.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like it's a no-brainer for self-serve to some degree, because you are trying to talk to some higher, I guess, technological folks within the space.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you.
I feel like we a question there, Alan.
Yeah, it was great.
Sorry, Rob.
You feel like we addressed your question thoroughly?
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Cool. Yeah, and I do just want to say, getting back to one general comment about the demand engine, is it is not the quickest path to revenue.
Right. Yeah.
It just isn't. So, that is just something that everyone needs to understand. We're every element of the organization, right? We're not going to see content and community driving very, very quick revenue, most likely, unless there are already a large number of high intent educated buyers out there but then that's probably not connected to the new demand engine initiatives. I was at a company where, we put together just the basic version of this, and the product market fit was so good and the competitors in the marketplace were so bad that the return on investment right out of the gate was absolutely outlandish and will never be repeated again. It was the long-term demand engine that maintained that, but in the initial months of just presenting ourselves reasonably to the market, we had a nice sort of burst of revenue. But there was a downtime after that first 2 to 3 months before that 9 to 10 month mark hit, where the demand engine really started to gain traction, where we were kind of going, what is the data telling us? What are we really seeing happen in the marketplace? and it was very confusing. And I look back on it now and I see intuitively, well, the demand engine wasn't responsible for what we had at the onset. That was just the, people out in the marketplace that were just sitting there waiting on something like us to show up. And then the demand engine took over a few months later. So, Rebecca, I'd love for you to unmute and share what you got.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This is all really relevant, especially having recently come in from the agency side for me. Kind of have some thoughts and then kind of a question for all of you, really, with businesses in particular in the agency I was at, where we dealt with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses kind of into their first foray with marketing. They are so focused heavily on paid because that's what they hear so much about. Facebook ads so well, Google ads doing so well that they come in and they want to essentially skip the demand gen phase. They want to skip the content creation and just go straight to paid. And they have this belief that that is going to work out for them long term. And then they get frustrated when their ads aren't taking off because they have no content or presence behind it. So just from that perspective, I think I was able to see a lot of the effects of the companies and the executives that made the decisions to overlook the demand need there. And it really had a very detrimental effect on their marketing and their industry in general. And a lot of these small businesses would take paid as their sole attempt with marketing, and they would literally shut their doors because it just didn't work out for them. And that was disheartening because I think a lot of them could have had a good opportunity to make the go of their business if they had not skipped so many steps on that path. So part of that, and with you, Adam, in particular, I was curious, and you, Rob, with your sales background, how have you gone about convincing, whether it's executives at your level or other companies, the importance of this step and the importance of that content creation and that building that community before they really start to throw in the towel, I guess, if you want to say it, before they really just give up?
Yeah. So are you asking from a perspective of in-house or as an agency?
Both. I think as an agency, it's really, there are so many people that were even utilizing services where that's what we should have been doing, organic social. We'd try to do community building through it, but they would just nitpick it to death and insist on it being so salesy that really it wasn't even achieving the impact it traditionally should have had. So one, kind of how you would tackle it from an agency perspective with what you're doing and just in-house even. I think a lot of the content creation for these companies really should take place in-house, as they're the product experts, the people who know the business, and they can share that with an agency to help disseminate it to the public. But even getting on board with that at times was very difficult.
Yeah. So from an agency perspective, and I think this is more for folks who are going to go start a new agency, or if you have a very, very young agency, is don't say yes to a big contract because it's a big contract. Be okay by saying, we do it my way. This is how I do it. If you don't want to do it my way, here are a couple of, other companies that I think you do really well with, right? Like, so don't be afraid to say no to people who aren't going to do things the way that you want to do them as an agency, because you're going to you're just not going to do well, right? Like if you don't do it the way you're going to fail, because you don't want to get up every morning and do a shit ton of paid media. Are we allowed to swear on this? I'm not sure. A ton of paid media. And you don't want to do that. And it's especially with bad paid media, you're not going to do well. From an in-house perspective, I think I posted something about this on LinkedIn. Maybe it was TikTok the other day, but do it on your personal LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Say, hey, it worked, right? Like, look, I do no paid media on my personal LinkedIn, and I just post a lot of X type of content. Let's start doing it with ours. I grew my audience 10x by posting more content like this. It stands to reason it's going to work, for a company too. Because especially nowadays when people are talking with companies, like they're talking to people, so that's one way to do it. Another way is to really sit down and say, hey, look, I always say, you hired me for a reason, right? Do you want me to do my job really, really well? Now, if you're 22 years old right out of college, it's probably not the conversation to have. But, if you've been in the industry a long time, make them feel like they can lean on you, if that makes sense. That way you can kind of convince them. It's kind of hard because I'm not a good convincer. I just kind of do my thing, and like I wouldn't join a company who wouldn't let me do it, if that makes sense. So I don't know if I'm like the best. I'm good for answering that question for the agency because I've done this before, and Alex Elias, who's on the call, can vouch for that. And like, uh, but I would not join a company who wouldn't let me do it my way. So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer the in-house question.
Well, I can speak to that because I was the combo sales and marketing leader from the point of there was no go-to-market strategy to being, you know, both all the way through to a 10x in revenue. And I was dealing with a founder who had a dream but no vision and no go-to-market strategy, and a fantastic product market fit. And so the concerns that I ran up against were really just, you know, expenditure related. So they really didn't have a philosophical perspective on the topic. And it was more a matter of, yeah, but what's it going to cost? So I found ways to do it very frugally. And one of the tricks that I used before the pandemic was I had Zoom meetings very similar to this one, that the distributors of our product were invited to just sign up and join once a month. It's a very casual conversation. I encouraged them to invite industry friends of theirs to come along, and I would answer product specific questions or business specific questions, but they would talk to one another about what was going on in the industry. And it became this community. Like they looked forward to it every first Monday of the month. Just the company was hosting a time to get together with their friends. It cost the cost of our Zoom account. And I mixed paid on multiple different platforms in with a ton of organic. But I'll never forget, I started getting ads from one of the Facebook ad gurus at one point, just 3 or 4 times a month, just really trying to sell me on the genius of that guru. And they were bragging on, you know, spending 10K and getting 100K in revenue on paid. And I'm like, my numbers are 8 times better than that. My ROAS is better than what you're advertising. And it was because I was doing all these other things that weren't paid. And it was all working together. All of the algorithms on all the platforms were friendly to us because of the way that I had mixed paid and organic content, and the way that I had built things that were really not even traditional marketing things, like that Zoom meeting once a month and just other things. And eventually we get to the 24-month mark, and the overall revenue numbers are irrefutable. And no, I cannot attribute every marketing dollar spent to a sale. I can't like draw that line from this dot to this dot every single time we make a sale. And of course, the treasurer really wanted that. You know, the bean counter really wanted that, right? But the founder CEO basically said, well, no, he can't do that, but look at the revenue. And so if you don't have enough of a runway to prove out the process without so much scrutiny that it gets sabotaged, then that's a recipe for losing. Even if you can't like justify every dollar spent, which by the way, it's going to get increasingly hard with the way the internet is changing to do attribution. It's going to be harder and harder and harder to do. So it's really a philosophical agreement, or at least a neutrality, I think, from the C-suite above to say, well, we'll give this at least 9 to 12 months to see if we can see some positive turn in the revenue. Because shorter than that, if they're going to be scrutinizing every dollar and criticizing every turn and twist, it's probably going to end badly.
Yeah, might be time for a new job.
Yeah. So, Mikhail, I'm going to encourage you to unmute there, friend, and give us what you got.
Yeah, I just wanted to add from in-house angle, as I am a long life in-house marketer. So for me, it's kind of been easy. So I don't think that this is like a philosophical agreement. I think it's only to some extent an agreement. But if you take this self-attribution data, which we've been doing since 2015. So we've done a lot of things wrong, but this one we got right a long time ago. So we have a massive data coming from this self attribution, and you can actually track your customers, and using this data, you can just basically show what drives those deals. And that's how you can this. It's not that they're coming from paid. So if you're going to run ads, you just capture demand that was created elsewhere.
Right. And I think that's where, like, especially in this happens a little bit more in enterprise than I see small business. And this kind of actually goes back a little bit to what Rebecca was saying with the paid, and like trying to convince people of this, is that, when I say like, hey, we should do it this way, it doesn't mean like don't run net new audience paid media, right? Like, unless your team is brand new and you're starting a demand engine, like, you don't want to just like stop your net new targeting. Like, you are going to see your revenue drop. Like, it's not the best way to get revenue, but you are getting sales from that. Like, it's likely you are. I mean, obviously there are situations where maybe you're just not at all, in which case that might just be a targeting issue or a messaging issue. Like, and from an in-house perspective, do some like intermediate KPIs. Say, hey, we're not going to see revenue from this for a few months, at least nothing that's like massive. But like, here are some things that we can look at to make sure it's working, right? Like time on site. Somebody has a lot of is very interested in your product because they've been seeing stuff and the time on site is increasing, you're probably doing really good. If you're getting a lot more organic traffic, you're probably doing really good. If you're, vanity metrics, aren't just vanity metrics like likes and comments and views organically, those aren't just vanity metrics. They can be used as intermediate KPIs to make management and C-suite feel better about what's going on. But you set those in advance, right? Don't wait for them to say, hey, we haven't seen revenue, and say, oh, but look, our views, because they're gonna be like, no, like we talked about revenue before. Like, set that, kind of expectation ahead of time. At month 1, we're going to look at views. At month 2, we're going to look at likes. At month 3, we're going to look at, we're going to start looking at revenue, but I really want to make sure that we're looking at organic traffic. I want to make sure we're looking at time on site. So set those ahead of time, right, Rebecca? And then you could probably do a little bit better with, helping the, management understand, like, hey, we are making headway on our goals.
I think that's really, really good perspective, because there will be an increase in, other metrics that long-term aren't going to be what we care about, but in the short term point towards the growth in revenue. And it's a kind of a progressive metric kind of focus in the demand engine philosophy that as we get there, there are pointers along the way, for lack of a better word. Would you agree with that, Adam?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different KPIs you can kind of go to. It's kind of broke up there a little bit, so I'm just kind of answering a question I heard half of, but I think I agree with what you said based on the crackliness of that.
Gotcha. Well,
my internet like flashed.
Guys, this has, I think, been a really great conversation. We'll do it again next week, and next week we're going to be joined by Sam from Refine Labs, and we're going to be talking about metrics and which metrics we're actually going to optimize for and measure. So, we'll kind of be carrying along from the last thing we talked about today on the second point of our manifesto. And big thanks to Adam for joining us on the first day of your new gig as well. So much appreciated, friend, and all the best to you in that. And thanks everyone for joining us. We'll hope to see you again next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.